Ken, did you say how you know somebody's rebuilding those air seeders?
Yeah, a couple of guys have gotten Gandy in fast line, a guy out of North Dakota, and I'll have to look up what his reference, but he apparently ships them all over. He somehow has a line of getting old boxes and, fixes them up and sells them for fairly cheap. Yeah, because the Valmar boxes, those bigger ones, cost you 15 grand. They're smaller ones, but yeah, there's cheaper ways to do it, I think. I clearly don't sell Valmar or any of the boxes. Someone had a question about non-GMO, and I work with a number of really non-GMO growers, and he has his herbicide program. He sent it to me, what he works. So whoever asked that question, find me and I can share that with you. He does non-GMO corn and beans, and he's cover cropped all his acres. So he's doing some pretty innovative herbicide stuff. And like typical, most people say this won't work, but then it's working for him. So, surprise, surprise.
I think one of the topics that we wanted to cover was termination, cover crop termination, and timing from that standpoint. So I know that the example that we have here with Lucas and what we're trying to do with high residue cover crops is something that we see a lot of value in bringing the ease of control for weeds and then some pests from that standpoint, where we're not seeing so much issue with slugs per se, because we have that green residue there as a food source as opposed to our cash crop. So those are the two key points we have there. And we're looking at using a type of roller crimper to keep that residue lower so it doesn't interfere with the growth of your cash crop as well. So those are some points that we feel are valuable to have there. If you have any input on that.
Yeah, I think using that roller crimper as a kind of to press it down, whether you're using herbicide or not, has some real value.
What's funny is in meetings like this, there's always somebody that has something that hasn't worked the way we felt it. One gentleman said that he feels that he's had less slug pressure. One guy today said he felt he had less slug pressure where he was brown. And I'm not going to argue with that at all. If you have something that's working, do it. Because every operation is a little bit different. Something that I didn't mention that made me think about it, seeing some pictures here that I don't know why, but last year when I was around talking last winter, I talked a lot about slugs down in Virginia, some major issues with slugs, and whenever somebody would come up talking to me, they were telling me how there's this one field of slugs laid off 2 or 3 times, and I say, well, let's talk about the history of the field. He's like, well, it was a wheat stubble field. I put this blend of cover crops in there, and it had some of the biggest radishes ever, and had some brassicas, another kale in there, and for some reason, and we've heard this, that radishes and brassicas are a good magnet for slugs, and for some reason, in the last year or so, some of my friends also have these companions with a lot of brassicas in it, and we've had more slug pressure where the brassicas are. I don't know why, but it's been the rule of thumb in our area. If you've had some serious slug issues in the past, especially in the companion crop, multi-species crops that have a pretty heavy stand of brassicas in it. So that's something I've noticed.
Yeah, I mean, slugs are cyclical in nature. And I think for a lot of my guys, we're 3 or 4 years into a no-till cover crop system, and slugs have been bad the last couple of years. And because they're so young in the system, they have a recent history of neonic use, particularly on their soybeans. And I think we're still seeing the effect of that on scarab beetles. Dr. Harmon, he's kind of more of an expert than any of us on this. And what John Tucker's been showing, like he's been saying, Purdue, their researchers would say similar things. I still think we're seeing legacy carries over from that on our beneficial insect populations. And it takes time to recover that balance to the system.
3 to 5 years.
Okay. Yeah, so
They only lay 20 eggs a year, 10 to 20 eggs, so in order to build up the population, it can take them 3 to 5 years to get back.
yeah, so that beetle, that is the big predator of the slug, Jim's saying lays 20 eggs a year, 3 to 5 years to get that population back up to where you can say, because my guys always ask me, okay, Dan, I love beneficial, sounds really good, but tell me that I can not spray and depend upon that beetle. Well, we don't even know what to look for beneficial insects. Like, how do you ID them, right? Do you have to have an entomologist degree, or can you quickly kind of know, do I spray or not, right? What's that threshold? That's a tough question to call. Who's going to ensure that I'm right if I say that, right?
Well, I think there's just a whole lot of comment about slug pressure and everything, and what I've learned from all the years we've been into it, and if Ron Hammond was here, and he would be talking in the 80s and early 90s, this farm was the slug capital of the world, so that's where a lot of the data come from. And what we found over the long haul is, if we delay planting and get the soil warm enough, that the corn will sprout in 3 or 4 or 5 days. And normally then we're getting out of that cold rain cycle, which is probably the middle of May to the 1st of June. That corn's rapidly growing. Yes, they'll still eat the bottom leaves, but as long as we have the top leaves green, and the growing point hasn't come out of the ground yet, the corn can take a tremendous amount of problems with slugs. But still, I've had it look like a cigar and still had good yields.
But Dave, I got to get my corn planted by April 20th.
That's the Corn University, yes. But I think when we were looking at no-till and cover crops, we actually moved that planting date back 3 weeks, and we still see the same yields. At least we have on this farm. Corn is cool season grass. Right, it's the warm season grass, guys. We're getting guys planting April 1st. I mean, our neighbors are all, they've been warming up their tractor and planter for the last 2 days, hoping that they can do something. And it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, it gets back to my opening point about have we been sold a bill of goods from industry. Whose benefit is it, if we can get the same similar yields, whose benefit is it to plant early? Like, honestly ask yourself that question. In a conventional system without soil biology, maybe, yeah.
It's fertilizer companies, because I know years ago, I remember sitting through a meeting with the gentleman from Kansas, who's like, I remember I was sitting in a meeting with the gentleman from Kansas, was in Pennsylvania, and he was showing us about all these deficiencies showing up in all our corn. We have this deficiency, you gotta add this. You have this deficiency, you gotta add that. And then he would say, but once the soil warms up, your deficiencies go away. So why don't we just wait till the middle of May to plant our crops?
Well, another thing we've noticed too is that in our no-till with cover crops, being that soil temperature is cooler by 20 degrees, we do not see the problem with later corn pollinating that our conventional guys see, because when their corn's planted the first day of June, conventionally, by the 30th of June, that soil temperature is probably 100 to 110 degrees, and that's killing the pollen when the plants threaten to pollinize, And in our fields, we've seen ground temperatures at 70 and 80, and at ear height, it's probably still at 85 to 90. So it's not been detrimental for us to delay the planting, and we've seen no loss in yield by backing up 2 weeks or 3 weeks, as much as 4 weeks, and still having the same yield and the same moisture of our corn, because the corn's not deterred in the growth because it's coming right up. You've seen your neighbors plant corn on the 15th of April and not seen the corn until the 8th of May, and it comes up yellow, and the insects are working on it.
That's that yield. That's just that yield when it's planted.
Yeah, right. So I guess I'm just saying, learn to manage these things and look at it and look at the soil, let the soils tell you when it's time to plant and not the calendar.
You're delaying corn harvest, there's your corn planting 3 weeks, what about soybeans? Plant them first?
We do a lot of times, because it seems like the beans take the cold weather better than the corn does. You know. Yes.
Help the guys here that are thinking about transitioning to this, David, what the first visual indicators are gonna be that they're moving in the right directions. What are the first, what's the low-hanging fruit that they're gonna start to see on their farms to see if they're really making some positive changes?
So what's success in year one for a guy cover cropping first time? Oh, man. Well, I would say, what drives that person and motivates them? How do they define success? For someone it might be that 5-inch rain event, I saw water infiltration go into that cover crop field, I'm sold. For some of my guys, they deep ripped and then they cover cropped side by side, they saw less ponding in the cover crop. Okay, that sold them on. I mean, those are just some of the kind of things that jump out as first indicators. It solves a problem for them, right? That would be one way to look at it.
But I think sometimes we see, especially where we're taking a conventional farmer and trying to get him adapted to looking at green covers. We try to force them into the rye situation after corn to go to beans. They seem to be comfortable with that. You know, everybody's planting soybeans and corn fodder residue now. And as soon as the beans come off, they get their deep rippers out and rip up that soybean field because it's hard. Well, it's probably the loosest that field's ever been, but you know, they got to rip it up to make them feel good. But I think we can get them accustomed to that, and we show them that they can have a 5 to 10 bushel yield increase by having that rye there. Maybe saving one herbicide pass. I like to tell them to look at their combine at harvest time, especially if they have conventional beans or conventional corn. Because most generally, unless it's an older combine, you know, anything that's 10 years or newer all has consumption of the motor fuel per hour. You know, and I can recite what our gleaner does, and maybe it's not the right color, but it doesn't matter, it still uses fuel. You know, when I'm combining my uncle's beans at 35 bushels an acre, we're burning 23 gallon diesel fuel per hour with a 30-foot header, conventional. We come to our farm, we've got rye, we're cutting 74 bushel beans on 19 gallon. To me, that's, you know, that's a 5 gallon savings an hour. I don't know what that translates into acres, because, you know, we'll take the header off 4 times in the day to move because most of our fields are only 5 or 6 acres, you know, so we lose a lot of time on the road. But, you know, if we're saving a half a gallon, which is $2, you know, that's a savings towards whatever we've done, you know. And if you can save $2 here and $3 here and $4 there, we've soon created a margin of profit that we didn't have, you know. I mean, my fuel guy, he just gets all upset because, you know, my neighbor, he's delivering fuel every 3 weeks to him, and he delivers twice a year to us. You know, we farm 900 acres and we burn 1,400 gallon diesel fuel. You know.
I think the biggest thing for my dad when we started planting these big covers that he swore he didn't like is the big rainfalls that we would get. And that's all I envisioned around here when I would drive through and see these big flat fields. And I see the ponding. And I think that's definitely going to be that way in another month when it's corn plant season. It's going to do the exact same thing. And I know at home now, because of our deep ripping rye, that's what I forgot. I forgot to make that slide I was going to feed. But you have that huge root structure, letting these covers grow and penetrate some of that compaction. And within a year or two of us doing the large covers, I'm not scared to death at all about a 2 or 3 inch rain event coming, that I have confidence that we're not going to lose any soil, and that once the dust dust starts to stir up again, there's gonna be a really good stand of corn. And that's what I've heard the most out of a lot of the grain producers in our area that have been reluctant to start planting green, is they don't like to talk about it to their buddies too much that aren't in the know. They'll tell me later on the season, but they're like, you know those really wet fields that we have? It's like, yeah. It's like, we planted green into that? It's like, yeah. It's like, it really got wet? And I was like, yeah. I said, I corn did great in that rye. It's like, it was like a picture perfect stand. And that's the aha moments that I had to struggle with my dad with some fields that I told somebody today, like, the sequence, everybody plants certain fields, they're drier than others, and it's what you always do. And all of a sudden I start changing that sequence, and my dad starts pushing back, we can't go over there, that field's too wet yet. Like, it's gonna be fine. It's got our system, we can plant it at a different time now. And that's where things start to show up, when you start seeing your overall system change, that you can go at different times and just have better stands than what you used to have.
Yes.
Can you buy beneficial insects?
So the question is, can you buy beneficial insects? Yes.
Like a herbicide?
Yes, so for on our small, we have 6,000 square feet under plastic, I release beneficial arachnoid wasps. You know, if we have an aphid outbreak, particularly on spinach in the spring, that's a problematic occurrence. And so I can buy these bugs in a box and release them. So at a small scale, yeah, that makes sense to do. It's economical. At the field scale, just create the habitat and food source. That's what we need to do. And so there's different ways to do that. Taking out fence rows is not the way to do that.
Right. And I think, you know, you have, as you want to increase your beneficial insects, you have to understand what you're doing as far as insecticides, fungicides, and treatments on corn. You know, I'm not opposed to treatments on corn, but let's find the treatments that's not harmful to our beneficial insects. And that's going to be tough to do. I mean, we should all go home from here and demand from our seed salesmen to help us to promote more beneficial insects, you know.
Yeah, I think
Good luck with that.
Yeah, right.
I moved, a lot of guys, you know, they're stuck on the early planting. Okay, so for soybeans and corn early planted, they'll keep the seed treatment on. It gives them a level of comfort, okay? But as you get into May, like you're saying, there's no need for them.
But they already got it bought and it's in the bank, you know, but.
So then we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Does it really say that we need slugs to get beneficial insects? That you need a food source?
No. You could look at it that way, but
How many do you want? You want to buy some?
bugs in the jug.
You might have to tolerate it, right?
Yeah.
Well, and that's why I got thinking about it, is talking about beneficials. And everybody's looking for a silver bullet to wipe out this slug.
We go wipe it out.
No.
But what the problem is there's something else that's out of whack in our system. Dave's learned how to get over them, deal with them. And I think farms that they really show up in, I know Blake sent me some pictures of some monsters that he had in his field that he should have picked up and deep fat fried them and should have sold them at the Chinese buffet, I think. But there's something out of whack, and I've learned in the last couple of years that when we run into something like that, there's something out of whack in nature that it's going to take us a little while. We don't know what the answer is. We probably never will know what the answer is. That we'll start to overcome that, whether it's certain. So I love watching some of the aphids. Everybody starts freaking out about we got to spray for aphids. My agronomist about 5-6 years ago was scouting. I come home from being away for about a couple weeks, walked out in my field, and they were all over me. He went out and scouted, said, yeah, they're there. He said, I'll finish up in a day or two. I sprayed like 100 acres, and then he went to scout the next day, and we got a little bit of a rain shower, and he couldn't find an aphid anywhere. And they got like, there was a fungus or something that came, and they were gone. So we were well above threshold. We sprayed a couple acres. That's the last time I sprayed for something like that since.
Well, I think it's all in your mindset. You know, do you want a healthy plant? Well, you want healthy plants, but you know, can we lose a leaf or two and not sacrifice the yield? You know, we cannot lose a leaf or two in conventional tillage and not sacrifice yield because of the things that you're working with there. But in the no-till and the cover crop situation, I think we can see some things that happen to our crops that really don't hurt them as bad because we're on a balanced soil. We usually have fungi in the soil if you no-till for 2 or 3 years with some cover. And that's the communication to each other plants to help them get nutrients there, to correct those problems when we have insects biting on it or slugs. And we're not slug-free, guys. I mean, we could go out there beside the corn planter today and don't stand very long because the slugs will be crawling on your shoes, you know. But we still have them, but they don't do economical damage to us, you know. You know, in June, we'll see lightning bugs look like the 4th of July here. And I didn't learn until a year ago that lightning bugs is a predator for slugs. You know, so if you don't happen to have lightning bugs, you may have a lot of slug pressure.
Right, so you gotta figure out why you don't have lightning bugs.
Right.
Maybe it's not supposed to be in your local microclimate, but maybe they are. Why aren't they? That's the question we should be asking.
Right. You know, and I really, you know, I'm having problems with guys calling me up and say, hey, we got voles and mice problems. You know, what do we do? Well, you know, to me, they made the wrong management decision when somebody sold them red clover because it was cheap. Because you got to understand that red clover has a big crown. If we go out, if we had red clover, I'd show you, but we don't have it because we have that kind of problem. So to me, red clover is not worth it in the cover crop situation. You know, I'm not going to grow a cover crop that I have to have problems managing. You know, if it bites me in the butt one time, that's it. It don't get a second chance. You know, there's too many of them out there to use. So, you know, we have this large crown and the mouse lives in it all winter. And then we plant the corn. And guess what? He's hungry and he's going to eat the corn. There's things you can do. You can go to the dog pound and get feral cats and throw them out there. And there won't be no problem.
Rent a cat.
Rent a cat. Or if you don't like that one, just get some fence posts and put a 2x4 boulder to it and drive it in the ground. So that, I mean, we got hawks that don't fly more than 35, 40 feet. They're like I am. They get tired. You know, so give them somewhere to set.
I was out in, to that point, I was out in Oregon where they do perennial ryegrass. They have 30 years of pasture seed production. So you think we have vole problems? They have serious vole problems, and they have a regulation culture that if they see, there's someone that drives around, and if they see a little bit of bait on top of the ground, you're fined $1,000. So they're out there baiting these mouse runs, you know, with these special things that get the bait in the ground. And one of the innovative farmers out there, he goes, you know, I see my neighbors doing that, big growers. I go out there, I take my T-post, put my raptor perch up there, and within a week, that vole mound is gone.
Yeah.
You know, and so those kind of strategies, if we can do that with owl boxes, there's 4 species of raptors in Indiana, there's a bunch of owls that, if we can put up barn boxes, and you know, a pair of barn owls will eat 50, 60 voles in a night. And bats. Yeah, there's some other kind of bats that will do that from the insect side. So it sounds kind of crazy, but these are tools we've never utilized.
Well, then the other day, well, it's not been the other day, a month and a half ago, I was in Kansas, and these guys were having vole problems, and I was sitting around the table at supper time, chewing rag with everybody that do anything, supposedly. You know, how deep your boots get there is pretty bad. But 2 of them are saying, you know, we planted 2 pounds of chickweed vetch with our cover crops, and we no longer have vole and mice problems. He says, they don't like that chickweed vetch. I said, well, maybe that's an answer.
I've heard that once or twice, but I don't know where it
I don't
came
know. You know, but you know, there's some other things. You know, most of the voles and mice come from the woodlot and move out to the field. So if you got a woodlot or a waterway that's harboring them, you know, maybe you just take a 6-foot disc and make a little pass around the field, make a bare place so the predators can work on it. You know, there's all kind of ways to solve it. You know, another good thing you can do with it is put 2 spoonfuls of cayenne pepper in the seed bag when you dump it in the corn plant. They'll eat 1 or 2 kernels, but that'll be it. You know? So there's ways to solve these problems. I mean, everybody's looking for excuse not to have cover crop and no-till. It's figuring out how to handle those problems when they come up, guys. And that's why I like what we're talking about this morning, is having a peer group and calling people and say, hey, what do I do? You know, get somebody to give you know. I'm not afraid to call Lucas, and he'll give me some damn off-the-wall thing, and we'll go try it, you know. And that's what you have to be willing to do.
Yeah, I think if we can set up perches in our, around the edges of our fields, like permanent ones on telephone poles, but also in our fields in the fall, and kind of preemptively set up them. Out in Oregon, they're able to do that, like within a week. He's saying they're gone. I'm sure it's not quite that great, but you know, we can set up systems to do that.
Well, I know when Jay and I was in France, you know, we was on fields, and I was surprised how flat France was, but well, that's another topic. But, you know, here they have these fields that they're, and every 4 hectares, we kept seeing these tripods look like they'd hang a hog on and skin it, you know. And I said, what the hell's going on? And he said, well, that's for our perches, because they were 1.5 miles, 2 miles long. And he says, our flyers, predators don't like to fly that far. So they have these perches they just set up, and, you know, Jim told me to do it. He says, if you're going to use a fence post to put a T on, he says, make sure you paint it orange so you can find it when you're harvesting. Because, you know a 7-foot fence post wraps all the way around an R62 rotor? And it does thump, you know. That's experience talking, guys.
The deer like to knock them over.
Question.
With the traditional corn soybean rotation in cover crops, is it possible to develop really good soil health, or do we need to diversify with small grains, you know, and then include the crop development?
I'll answer that start. You can do it. You can do it. It's going to be a lot slower. You know, I think what we're missing in the corn bean rotation, we can get decent cover crops. We can get them 6 to 10 inches tall, but we can't get the root growth and the height of our covers that we can if you have a 3-year rotation with grain in the mix. You know, I think if you're in a corn bean rotation, probably 1 year out of 5, you've probably got preventive planted somewhere. That's when I would go with the big species if you don't want to grow wheat or a cereal crop. I mean, I really get upset when I go out in Iowa and Kansas and those places, and, you know, their preventive planted hole is 25 acres with a standpipe in the center of it because it flooded out. And they're out there disking all summer long, you know. My God, you can go out there and plant cover crops and solve 90% of their problem, you know. And I think if you have, and I'm hoping I can change the rules on crop insurance, if you have preventive planting, the rule should read, you must have a cover crop that year, period. You know.
I kind of think $3.50 corn, that should kind of classify as prevent plant, right? If you really look at the budget, you might be better off just not planting corn.
Let's plant more corn.
Something I noticed in the last couple of years, doing some soil health tests, kind of had my eye open. It's something that we've been watching with our soybean crops. We've been no-tilling for a lot of years, and we weren't doing a lot of heavy covers, but we started to get more and more erosion. Probably a couple of years before we started covers, and I couldn't figure out, our soils were getting a little more mellow. Soil was moving again, is why I liked the adoption of cover crops. But here about 4 years ago, we pulled a soil health test out of a pea field, yellow pea field I harvested, had a multi-species cover on it. Cornfield with rolled rye, so it was corn green with big rye cover on it. And Joe Clapperton was doing a thing out at the National No-Till Conference. He's like, bring 2 soil samples out, we're going to look at them and compare them. Like, cool. So I don't like digging holes. I don't like digging into China. I got other things to do. But I pulled these samples and I laid them down in my basement. And right away, it was night and day difference between the two. Did soil health test, the Sylvina test, the pea field with multi-species cover on it looked like tilled soil. Aggregate stability was like next to nothing. Took them to the meeting. Joe Clapper was like, "Well, you got them out of your neighbor's field that was tilled." I was like, "No, that field's been no tilled for 20-some plus years." She's like, "Oh, no, son." I was like, "Yeah, it is." So I talked with Ray Archuleta a little bit about this, and kind of a light bulb went off with him. He's like, "We've been seeing some of this, and it's the same thing that's happening with our soybean fields. Is these solid legume stands are very detrimental to soil health and aggregate stability. It just pulls all that carbon out of the system. I think a corn-on-corn system will build soil health with covers interseeded will be 100% better than a corn-bean rotation. It's the amount of carbon we're pumping back into the system. These legumes, like alfalfa, I've dealt with that dairy for numerous years. I begged them to go to a rye corn silage system for years, because I wasn't making no money off the alfalfa, but as soon as once they left, I left, they started to do rye corn silage. Soil health goes through the roof because you're not having a alfalfa field that's a solid legume that is very detrimental to soil until you kill it after it's this big and plant corn into it. It was a real eye-opener for me about 5 years ago when we seen that, how, and also, not to beat Roundup up again, but I think the work he does, Dan does with the organic guys, organic guys say about how detrimental chemicals are to our system, which we say how detrimental tillage is to the system, but I think guys are using too many passes of a chemical that we can be very detrimental to our system using too much. And
Yeah, I think that point, Klaus Martin, he's kind of famous organic producer out of New York. He said famously, you go to in front of a no-till crowd and they're all anti-plow and or you go to organic meeting and they're all anti-chemical, anti-GMO. And his statement is, you guys are both wrong. The problem is you're both not putting enough carbon into your soil. That's the fundamental problem. And it's not the plow's fault, it's not the herbicide's fault, there's certainly effects, side effects. There's, when you take a medicine, there's a side effect, right? But let's think about the fundamental driver of the system, and it is carbon. And your statement about a corn after corn with a living cover crop in that might be pretty powerful. But it's also still missing some things, right?
Yes.
Elaborate a little bit on this continuous alfalfa or alfalfa crops or taking carbon out of the soil. How about if you would leave that last stand of hay go back into the soil? Would that solve the problem? Clarify that, would you?
How about if you leave it grow, would it help solve the problem?
oh, absolutely.
Yes.
The problem is we were making 5 cuttings a year, whacking it off, 28 days, and the 5th cutting, we ain't gonna let that alfalfa recoup anything. We're gonna take that last cutting for ourselves because we need it for the cows. Well, I've learned, Blake and I had this conversation last night. I hollered at my wife. She wanted to mow that yard one last time, make it look nice and pretty. I said, get off that lawnmower and let the grass go. It does not hurt anybody. And it's greening up nice, and it was probably about 4 or 5 inches tall. It looked like crap, but that stuff is gonna look so nice in the spring because it's had a chance to just rejuvenate a little bit. And allow that alfalfa, I think, to mature and bloom. If you only make 3 cuttings of alfalfa off of that, it'd be better off than making 5 cuttings off of it. It's not as high quality, we all know that, but when I watched, I think that's one of the biggest things I've seen. Blake says, what do you know? The realization, and I think Christine Jones is what hit that home with me, is just allowing these covers to mature and maximize capturing that sunshine and pumping that carbon into that system. And it's just a real lesson there that's hard to put a dollar figure to. And it's the same thing I watched with I'm not a grazing guy. If I was a grazing guy, it's like I just had one of my landlords Saturday, small little landlord, and he's like, what can I do to my pasture? Right away, what fertilizer can I put on my pasture? He's like, I don't have any grasses. And I walked out there, it really looked good. I'm not an animal guy, and I was like, do you have another fence we can put up here and just keep them off this one side? And like, let that grow, let it grow and get big. They're just used to keeping it mowed off like a lawnmower. And I talked to him a little bit, and he's like, a light bulb went off. He's like, I never really thought about that. And it's somebody just had to tell him that to think about it. And the same thing with these alfalfas and stuff is the same thing, because it's just when you're moving it that hard, and I talk about removing residues and building organic matter. A friend of mine, Jim Harbuck, I said numerous times, the big dairy, they're planting the 15-inch corn, chopping it, silage, silage, chopping that off, applying manure, separated manure with very little solids in it, and he's increasing his organic matter about 0.75% a year. But we're just feeding that biology and having a almost mature crop with a good solid root system in there all the time.
Yes.
How do you guys feel about field tile or cover crop? Do you feel like are you guys all tiled systematically, or have the cover crops improved or helped on any of the weather parts of the field long term?
Our long-term, most of our farms don't have cover crops. Governments have tile. But our cover crops has really made water infiltrate a lot better. We've lost those ponded holes that was 20 foot wide or 30 foot wide, you know, with the water ponds. Hopefully today, when you drive out, you'll see there's no water left along the road here, you know, because it just didn't filtrate that quick. We hope. And but we've seen less tile or less water holding by using the covers. You know, now, I'm not saying you don't need some tile. You know, we did do some tile work just because this year we had 60 inches of water. So what happened, our profile on the top got wet, and we still held all that water, and we still getting water, so our subsoil profile got saturated. So, you know, a month after it quit raining, we were still walking around with water squirting out of the top of the ground. You know, so we went in and put a few tile in to correct that. Well, I just think we were holding so much of that water that it just couldn't get away, you know.
That's kind of, we talked about what are some of the early signs, and some of it is this soil tilt that we see with the adoption of cover crops, where next year you're going to have to decrease your down pressure on your planter because you'll start to churn a lot of soil with your openers and stuff, and likely you increase your water holding capacity. So now you've got more moisture in your soil. So you have to watch and change your management a little bit and be observant of what's in the field. Those are two early things that you'll see as you adopt the larger covers and have more residue in place, from our experience.
Yeah, I agree with Dave. There's a place for tile. I think it's been oversold a little bit because, again, it's a quick silver bullet fix that allows us to keep doing what we've always done, right? But I think guys that, I have a couple farmers I'm thinking of that they systematically tile their fields, and they kind of are playing with cover crops, but when we go in and dig, there's still a compaction layer, 8-9 inches, then at 16 inches. So they put in the tile, but they're not getting the water to the tile because they're restricting the flow from compaction and lack of creating infiltration channels. So I think we got to make sure we're addressing both issues. I think Ohio State actually has some pretty good research on the ability of cover crops to compete with tile and to break compaction. Now, whether they can replace tile, I think it depends.